Hi, everyone. So I'm delighted today to be talking about a bit of a different topic, and that's the United Nations and jobs in the United Nations, working at the United Nations, also financial affairs for UN expats. It's great to be speaking. How about you introduce yourself to the audience and tell people a bit about your experience?
Thanks, Adam. My name is Bala Subramaniam Murali. I worked with the UN full time for over 25 years, and I came out of my full time UN employment in 2022. And right now, I live in Canada, and I do some advisory support work for the UN. In my time in the UN for close to 25 years, I have been physically posted. I started my UN career in my own home country, India, in New Delhi. And from there, we moved to the United Nations headquarters in New York. I was primarily working for the United Nations Development Program, which is the world's biggest development agency, and it's part of the UN. And after nearly 10 years in New York, we then moved to Tehran in Iran. And from Tehran, we moved finally to Vientiane, which is the Lao People's Democratic Republic, where I completed my full-time tenure in the UN. And during my time in New York, we have a system called desk officers where colleagues look after country portfolios. And during my time in New York, I have also managed the country portfolios of many countries like Malaysia, Philippines, Timor-Leste, Mongolia for a short while. And then for 3 years, I managed UNDP's portfolio in Afghanistan, which was our biggest portfolio at that point in time. In 2011, it was UNDP, not the whole of UN, just UNDP's portfolio alone in Afghanistan was about US dollars 750 million. And for 3 years, I managed the portfolio of Afghanistan and Iran out of New York.
Mhm.
So this has been my sort of path in the UN.
And did that mean you had to travel to those countries, or did you do it remotely?
Well, if you are, there are two types. One is, of course, when I say I was posted, we physically moved and lived in Tehran in Iran and in
Mhm.
Vientiane in Laos for approximately 4 to 5 years each.
Mhm.
But when I was in New York, where I was posted for 10 years, I was managing these country portfolios and I had to travel to them repeatedly.
Mhm.
Uh, and the frequency of travel normally depends on the size of the portfolio
Mhm.
because my main job was to serve as a bridge between our personnel and our teams in these countries and the headquarters in New York. And there was also, to a certain degree, functions of headquarters oversight and management. So, which basically means, typically, to give you an example, for a country portfolio like Malaysia, which even then was a fairly rapidly advancing economy, close to becoming a net contributor country, maybe one or at best two visits a year would be enough. Whereas for a country like Afghanistan, where our annual portfolio was in millions, in hundreds of millions, I was going there almost every quarter,
Mhm.
four, five, even six trips a year. So it varies, travel varies on the size and the complexity of the portfolio.
So how was it traveling to Afghanistan at that time? Was the safety always a concern? Were there a lot of logistics that went into it?
Well, my travels to Afghanistan started in 2009 and it went on till 2012, the 3 years I was managing the Afghanistan portfolio. Yes, traveling in those days also was definitely, there were serious safety issues. But in those days, two big factors helped. One was that there was a pretty large, what used to be called as the ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, which comprised of troops from many countries, including United States, United Kingdom, France, and many countries contributed troops. So ISAF was overall responsible for security. Plus, UN also had a pretty large security presence. United Nations has its own Department of Safety and Security. We call it DSS, which is based in New York. Ultimately, our security is their responsibility,
mm,
and they laid down fairly strict conditions. Just to give you a flavor, we always traveled in armored cars. We couldn't travel in a normal automobile. The whole of Kabul city was divided into what is called as boxes,
mm,
and you needed security clearance to move from one box to another. And for example, you arrive at the airport, your driver, or many times if you drive yourself, you will have to inform the control room over wireless that you're moving. So
mm,
you're more or less, your movement is tracked and monitored from a safety point of view.
mm,
And the other big challenge, I would say, not so much a shame, is Kabul had some very nice, modest, but very nice restaurants in those days. And we could not go to any of them. There were only a few restaurants that were cleared from a security perspective. Only we could eat only there. So, like for example, typically if I'm there on a 2 or 3 week mission, we would be repeating these restaurants almost every 2 3 days. It'll be the same place over and over again.
mm,
So it's yeah, it was not easy, and both in I think it was in 2010, if I'm not wrong, in 2011. One was the presidential election, another one was the election to the Afghan National Parliament. Those are times of very heightened militant activity. Like just before the elections, during the elections, there would be rocket attacks were pretty common. I have lived through many of them sitting in the bunkers. So it's yeah, but we could do a lot of work, and for us the most important factor, and which I believe it continues to remain this way, is the resilience of an average Afghan on the street is something that
mm,
I can't explain. You need to go there and feel it.
mm,
Imagine this is a country which has been near continuously at war now for almost 50 years, 40 or 50 years,
mm.
one war or the other, you know. But the people have learned to live, and it's quite remarkable.
I can imagine. But it's interesting. Then you mentioned you actually lived in Iran and Laos. And I can imagine that those two places, from a safety point of view, were not too bad, right? In terms of maybe some people think Iran is quite dangerous, but in reality, I imagine that in the streets in Laos and Iran, it's actually probably very safe, right? Both of those countries.
Well, when we were there in Iran from 2012 to 2016, and Laos was 2016 to 2022, of course, Laos is an exceptionally peaceful, calm place. There's never been a concern. Iran, I must underscore that it was an extraordinarily safe place.
Mm,
Even in the middle of the night, you could walk on the streets, and the crime rates were extremely low. There will hardly be any cases of anyone getting mugged,
mm,
and especially for all the international staff, particularly diplomats, Iran had a very highly developed system of what they called as a diplomatic police. It was a special arm of the police that was dedicated to diplomatic security, and they do a wonderful job. So yeah, from a basic living condition point of view, it was extremely safe.
mm.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Well, it's interesting. I visited Laos as well, and I didn't go to Vientiane, but I went to the second city, Luang Prabang.
Luang Prabang, yeah.
I think it actually gets more tourists than anywhere else in Laos because there's more going on. And I went just 18 months ago, and when I arrived at the airport, there's like about two airport security personnel checking for visas, and then you pass that, and there's like two baggage claim places, right? I guess Vientiane's quite similar, even though it's a capital city. Very, very peaceful, right? And not much going on. Having said that, I imagine Iran had some challenges though. So, for example, you probably couldn't use ATMs, but ATMs very easily, like money. I guess you couldn't just go to a restaurant and use your Visa card, right?
No, no. Those the financial aspects, because mind you, we lived through two phases. The initial phase when we went in, Iran was still under more or less very tight sanctions.
Mm,
And then came the negotiation, what is called as the JCPOA, and the agreement was reached in 2015, and things eased out. But during the entire period, no international credit cards will work.
mm,
International banking will not work. There were local debit cards, but they weren't, as functional. As foreigners, we couldn't get local credit cards.
mm,
But as UN, we were able to get local debit cards. But again, so essentially for us during our entire period at that time, almost 80 to 90% was only what you would call a cash economy. You had to
mm,
carry enough cash. And carrying cash in Iran is not easy because even then the real exchange rate was so much that you go and buy the traditional Iranian bread, you would need a few 100,000 riyals.
mm, mm.
So yeah, it was essentially a cash economy. Yes.
Sure. Um, so obviously you traveled a lot and worked in many places as a UN worker. And these days, you're coming towards the end of your career with the United Nations. Uh, would you recommend, in all honesty, though, that younger people look at the UN as a career? Because obviously, we're talking beforehand, there's a lot of cuts in the United Nations. There's a lot of job cuts happening in general or funding cuts. Obviously, different people want different things from a career, but would you say it's still a really good career if you want to, live and work overseas to work at the UN, or do you think people should consider the situation carefully, given what's happening in the world?
Okay, let me put it this way. First of all, I think people in the system and people who follow UN will know it. Let's face it, this is not the first time that United Nations is facing a financial crisis.
Mm,
It has lived through like a crisis like this many times, and it has always come out of it. So from that point of view, I would not say that it's a big issue. I'm fairly certain that this time around also UN will emerge successfully out of this. So that said, if if you are essentially looking for a career where you will get to see the world, where you will get to work with different kinds of people, cross cultures, cross
mhm,
nationalities, and more importantly, get to work with different kinds of governments.
mhm,
Because let's not forget, United Nations essentially is an intergovernmental organization. In fact, whenever many ask me how many bosses you have, just to make the point, I always used to say if you are in UN, you have 193 bosses.
mm,
Basically, there are 193 member countries in the UN. So it's
mm,
essentially an intergovernmental organization. Of course, Secretary General is the administrative head, but final decisions are all made in the General Assembly and in the Security Council, which are essentially populated by countries.
mhm,
So, one of the big aspects of working with the UN is that you get a chance to work with different governments. I have worked practically with all kinds of governments you can ever think of in the governance structure, starting from absolutely free, independent democracies, going all the way through one party ruled states, going down to, downright, governance structures bordering dictatorships. I have seen through and lived through and worked through all that. So that if you like that, that's another tremendous opportunity. And this is again something that I always tell people. If you decide to work for the UN, one of the things that you need to be prepared is that it is the world's biggest bureaucracy.
mm,
In fact, I often refer to UN as the mother of all bureaucracies. So at times, well, why at times? Many times it can be very frustrating. You need to learn patience. You need to learn how to maneuver. Uh, of course, if you work for maybe a specialized organization, like for example, since I'm sitting in Canada, talking of Canada, Canada hosts the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, which is headquartered in Montreal. Those types of specialized organizations, maybe this bureaucratic or administrative burden might slightly vary. But now I'm also now for the past several months I have been elected to the board of directors of the in every country there is an association of international civil servants.
Mm,
I have been elected to the board of directors of the Canadian Association of International Civil Servants. So when I go to Montreal and interact, I find that even in a specialized agency, there is bureaucracy involved. So bottom line, if you're one of those who gets easily flustered with bureaucracy, then maybe UN is not the choice for you.
mm,
You will encounter it one way or the other. But if you are able to and learning to walk through it, learning to work through it in itself is a huge skill.
mm,
But the biggest advantage or the biggest, what do you call, payoff in working for the UN, apart from the opportunity to travel the globe and visit countries, my career, my 25 years career in the UN, just to give you a flavor, has taken me through to almost 75, 80 countries in the world. That's not an opportunity which you would possibly get unless you're a pilot or in the crew of an airline. So it's really tremendous. But this comes at a price. Now, one of the big challenges, you have to be willing. You and your family will have to be willing to move every 4 years, 5 years.
mm,
Moving meaning your whole house goes into a container, including your car if needed, and you move.
mm,
That can be challenging to people, especially if you have school going children or aged people in the family. It can pose a big challenge. Um, of course, the UN moves you fairly well, but still, the fact of having to pack up everything every 4 years is not. Many people don't like that. Of course, there are jobs in the UN where you can avoid this. But one lesson I have learned even then, and now it's becoming more and more difficult, is that you don't get much of a choice in really deciding what you will do and where you will go.
mm, mm.
It's highly competitive, and so the agency decides where you go. Generally, the pay is considered among the best in the world. Plus, you have the added benefit of everything being tax free. Wherever you go, you don't pay any tax on your income. And most other countries, when you get up to a certain level in the system, other things are also tax free. You have access to tax free goods, including tax free cars, everything. So there are pluses, there are minuses, and it's an individual choice what you want to do.
Sure. Now, you mentioned it's very competitive in terms of moving within the UN system. But let's say somebody is not in the UN system. Let's say they're quite young, they're a student, or they're looking to get into the UN system. What would you say are some of the best ways for people to consider going into the system? Because obviously, there's more people looking to go in than the number of jobs, right? It's super competitive, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. See, first of all, the most important thing is UN is not a homogeneous entity. It's like I think as of the last count, maybe one of the things that's going to happen now, as per the reform of the Secretary General, what is called as the UN80 reforms, some of these agencies might get merged and become lesser. But as we speak, there are close to 35 or 40 different UN agencies. You have ranging agencies. Of course, the main United Nations, what you call the UN, is the Secretariat itself. And within the Secretariat, there are numerous departments. There are departments that do peacekeeping, there are departments that do security, there are departments that do economic affairs. And then you have specialized agencies. Like my agency, the United Nations Development Program, essentially is the development arm of the United Nations. Then, of course, the one of the some of the more popular ones, which people know about a lot. One is, of course, UNICEF, which
Mm,
works with children. Then you have WHO, the World Health Organization. Then you have the World Food Program, which essentially looks at food and aspects of food. There is also a food and agricultural organization that looks at agriculture across the world. There is even a UN organization for posts. There is a Universal Postal Union and the International Civil Aviation Organization. So the reason why I'm saying it is, if you are one of those who are wanting to specialize, you still have that opportunity. You can specialize in that area of work and choose or attempt to get into and work in that organization. And there are also enough opportunities for generalists.
Mm-hmm.
But the entry point varies quite a lot. For example, one very solid entry point. First of all, even to do internship, summer internships. That's a very good entry point. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
young people who are interested can look at trying to get internships in any of the organizations. But the thing is, even to do an internship, you need to have at least registered, not completed, but registered for a master's program.
Mm-hmm.
And entry, especially if you're talking a professional level, not support staff level, professional level, master's degree is minimum.
Mm-hmm.
So that's and then a lot of UN agencies have something called as Young Professionals Program, meaning they encourage young professionals to come, and it's basically a program where you get a chance to feel out the organization for a few years. The organization gets a chance to feel you out for 2 years, 3 years, and if things work out, you could end up getting an offer for a regular staff position, and then you build up from there. But at the same time, a note of caution: now more and more UN organizations are preferring to work with people with short-term contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, I'm possibly the last generation of staff who had a permanent contract with the UN, meaning there is a fixed retirement age, 62, or in some cases, later cases, 65. And, you run through it, of course. And then, but those types of positions have already become fewer and fewer.
Mm-hmm.
You would essentially now, because for organizations, it carries a huge commitment, in the sense of keeping a staff member for 20, 25, 30 years. While it has lots of pluses, many of us feel, for the organization, it's a huge financial thing. And I'll come to that in a minute, how UN gets its finances and how it operates. You will get an answer there. So getting through these young professional programs is one way. The other way is that if you are a person living in a country where there are UN agencies running programs, like for example, if you are in a country like, say, India, even China, or in much of the East European countries, they all have UN offices in their countries, and most of Africa. We have offices in 42 countries in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a local office and if you are a citizen of that country, one very good entry point would be to start working, applying and because getting into as a national staff is a lot easier than becoming an international staff. So
Mm-hmm.
you start your career like I did as a national staff in the United Nations office in India. And from there you build your way up. So that is another route a lot of people take. Of course, now there has been, in fact, for the past several years, maybe 5, 6, 10 years, there's been a big push to engender the organization. United Nations, especially at the top level, is still largely male. So there has been a very big push to bring in qualified professional female staff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a female, if you're a woman, your chances of entry and working, I would say, in terms of a betting prospect, is far better than being a man.
Mm,
And then again, nationality, though officially not everybody follows any quota system, UN always strives for diversity, meaning you just can't have agencies where only one set of nationals or one set of uh, people work. Just to give you my own example, as being a national of India, all nationals of India are at a big disadvantage simply because there are too many Indians already in the system. Whereas there are countries, there are even big countries who are big donors to the UN. I can immediately think of countries like Japan, Norway, which
mm,
have all, even United States to an extent, have all been big donors to the UN for many many years. But they don't have enough nationals from those countries working.
mm,
Japan and Norway, you'll be very it'll be very difficult to find Japan and Norwegian nationals in the UN system. Um, so if you're a national from that country, then you have, and the final very interesting way is that most UN agencies have something called as a Junior Professional Officers Program, which is a program funded by your country. Like, for example, many of the European countries, Japan, they are big time funders, meaning for the initial 2, 3 years, your government pays your salary and you still work for the UN. It is like almost like a, what do you call? It's like a process where you feel out.
mm,
And if the organization feels that your contributions are valuable and you feel building your career with this organization is great, you move on to a regular position. So there are those types of programs. There are not very many, but several countries, especially in Europe and Asia, have this.
mm.
Republic of Korea has a very good JPO program. I've had lots of nationals, especially from Japan and Republic of Korea, working with me as JPOs, junior professional officers. And Europe again, Netherlands used to have a big one, Norway, Sweden. For example, if you're a national of these countries, then you have that option too.
Sure. Now, moving on now to financial matters. So, obviously, a lot of people who work at the United Nations are familiar with the banking system and the options like the UN affiliated bank. What would you say are the biggest frustrations of UN workers who are sent overseas when it comes to financial matters?
See, having been for 5 years posted in 4 years plus posted in Iran, I have been at the worst receiving end of these challenges, given that the Iranian financial institutions are under possibly one of the tightest sanction regimes for many, many years now. Essentially, long time ago, almost 75, 80 years ago, United Nations formed this Federal Credit Union, the UNFCU, United Nations Federal Credit Union, is in many ways the bank, the go-to bank for all the UN staff all over the world.
Mhm.
They provide you banking support. Even if you're functioning in a country like Iran, which is full of sanctions, UNFCU still offers you banking support. Like, for example, if you're posted in Iran and if you are operating out of Iran, for example, most major US banks will cut their banking ties with you, however
All,
good
all
you.
of them, all of them, I think, apart from UNFCU, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they will cut you because that's the requirement of the, we like I personally argued out by saying that listen, I'm not here, I'm not an Iranian national, I'm not going to live here. I've come here to work on behalf of
Mm,
the UN. But the sanctions regime and the law behind the sanctions regime are such that they will have to cut their relationship with you. Whereas UNFCU has still been allowed to continue.
mhm,
So they do that. But then the problem with one of the big challenges UNFCU faces is that they don't have field presence
mm,
outside of New York. I think they have definitely presence in Nairobi. They have presence in Geneva, and then a few other places in the world. So they are not like you get, like, for example, you go and go into, even why Iran is under sanctions. Suppose, for example, you're working in Saudi Arabia, for example,
mm,
which is not under any sanction. You are posted in Riyadh or Jeddah. You don't have a local branch of an UNFCU.
mhm,
You have to essentially deal with them online.
mhm,
But despite that, I must say that many of us feel that they provide remarkable service. But one of the big challenges is that United Nations Federal Credit Union is a financial institution registered in the United States, operating under FDIC provisions. And it's considered like any other US bank. So there has always been this challenge that on the one hand, you could say that it's typically a US bank like Bank of America or JP Morgan Chase or whatever. But
yeah,
at the same time, it is a specialized bank created exclusively with the purpose of servicing UN staff all over the world. So this aspect has come more and more into light these days. Because despite UNFCU wanting to provide services, I must say their hands are tied many times simply because they operate under under US financial regulations. And I'll give you a concrete example to highlight this. For example, investment services. Typically, American institutions and American banks can provide investment services only to those who live in the United States.
mm,
For overseas expats, there are serious limitations and not many of them can provide. Now, that has come around to hit UNFCU. Till about 2000, I think it was even till about 2010, 2012, United Nations Federal Credit Union had its own investment arm.
mm,
So it was a relatively easy proposition for a civil servant like me to use that. Now they had to stop that because they suddenly found that many of them using the services were obviously not. Apart from the 10 years I've lived in US, I've never been a US resident.
mhm,
So you can't. Of course, it might turn out to be, in one sense, from a business perspective, positive for a financial advisor like you, because when we don't find financial services provided by them, we obviously turn to experts like you. But the fact remains that this is to just to highlight this has been one of the big challenges that they couldn't provide, let's say, the full, what do you call, menu of services because of the fact that they are registered in the US. This has been an ongoing negotiation they have been trying to do with the US authorities, highlighting the fact that they are a bank created with a special purpose. But that's
absolutely.
yet unresolved.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people say to me the UNFCU is a pretty good bank, but the investment services are very limited depending on where they live. That's been a commonality I've heard quite a lot.
Well, in fact, they don't have any investment services. The UNFCU investments, as it used to exist, is no longer there.
Mm,
They are offering investment services through a third party.
yes, yeah.
And that third party, I have discussed it with them. Let's not get into names, but that third party, I have discussed with them their ability to provide investment services to non-US residents
Mm,
is, let's say, extremely, extremely limited.
yes,
And
absolutely.
that poses a challenge for international staff in the UN, because Adam, imagine a scenario. Here is a person like me, 10 years in US, 4 years in Iran, 4 years in Laos. So where do I go to for investment services?
Mm,
It becomes a challenge. Either I go back to my own home country. If I do my investments in India, it has its own limitations.
mhm,
It's not global, at least then. It was not global, it was not flexible. And again, what do you say? Walking through banking systems in different countries in itself is a huge challenge.
mhm,
And then, of course, the single biggest villain in this piece is exchange rates.
Mhm.
If I now, for example, decide to go and invest even in, say, 4 years I was in Laos, if I had invested in Laos, it would have been in the local currency.
Mhm.
And pulling them out in its is one challenge, and then when pulling them out at the exchange rate is another challenge. So there are these practical difficulties, which is why UNFCU's investment services was extremely useful.
Mhm. Mhm.
And when they moved out of the scene, primarily because of the fact that there were limitations, given the fact that they were a US registered, they are a US registered and a US operating bank. Then, of course, there are a few of them like you, who are able to provide these services globally, and we have to rely on your expertise, or
Mhm.
expertise of people like you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, portability and things like that, it sounds simple, but it's not as simple as you would imagine, because also another factor is most of those individual countries won't also allow you to keep an account once you leave. So most people, of course, wouldn't want to account in Laos long term anyway, but even if they did, once they leave Laos, usually those
Your
financial
account goes.
institutions, just close the account. So
Yeah.
absolutely, portability is essential for services for expats. But I think for UN staff, similar to oil and gas, one of the big differences is you're often sent to all kinds of places, right, where there's very weak banking and investment services. So portability, which is what we focus on, is key. Um,
Yeah.
well, thank you very much for your time, then. I really appreciate it. We are planning to do a webinar for UN staff in a few months. So if you're watching and you're working in the UN or thinking about working in the UN, subscribe and you might get invited to that webinar. So thanks again for your time today. It was really useful for the viewers, I'm sure.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for the opportunity.